The Throne of Spirits, the Ascension of Kouamé. The city of Abidjan, the beating heart of the Ivory Coast, never slept. Between modern skyscrapers and narrow streets of vibrant markets, where echoing drums mingled with the sound of horns and preaching, one man carried a gift that defied the logic of the modern age. King Kouamé was not a traditional monarch. His title came from ancestral lineages, but his presence also imposed itself on contemporary society. An influential businessman and spiritual leader, he navigated between two worlds, that of the powerful who ran businesses and the invisible one, where the voices of ancient kings and ancestral gods whispered secrets that no one else could hear. That night, something strange happened. At the top of his luxurious building, where he kept an ancestral shrine, Kouamé felt the air change. The city lights flickered as if an invisible being was passing through them. The wind brought a smell of burning incense, but he hadn't lit anything. His eyes closed by instinct, and his mind was pulled to a place that didn't belong to reality. When he opened them again, he was no longer on the terrace. She was in the middle of a desert, in front of a blinding golden silhouette. A deep, powerful voice rang out. "The time has come, child of the spirits. Your fate is sealed. You have until the next eclipse to decide the future of your people." Then everything disappeared. Kouamé woke up sweating, his heart racing. The clock struck 3:33 a.m. and Kouamé was still on the terrace of his building, taking deep breaths to control his rapid heartbeat. What did that message mean? The eclipse would happen in a few days, and he felt that the fate of something much bigger than himself was at stake. The next morning, Kouamé summoned Jamila, a historian and spiritual researcher who had been working with him for years. "Jamila, I need you to find out everything you can about eclipses and prophecies linked to the ancient kings of Côte d'Ivoire." She frowned, adjusting her glasses. "Any particular reason, Your Majesty?" He hesitated for a moment before answering. "I had a vision. Something is about to happen. Small Blue Diamond, the revelation of the ancestral secret." While Jamila was researching, Kouamé decided to visit the Temple of Bassam, an ancient spiritual shrine hidden on the edge of the city. He was the only living descendant of the royal lineage who still knew the place. When he arrived, he was greeted by the old guardian Baba Suleiman, a man over 90 years old, with eyes that seemed to see through time. "You saw it, didn't you?" said Baba before Kouamé could say anything. The king nodded. "The eclipse, the golden spirit. What does it mean?" The old man took a deep breath and picked up a worn leather book from the shelf. "Centuries ago, a king with your gifts was tested by the spirit world. They say he had to choose between saving his people or keeping his own soul intact." "And what was his choice?" Kouamé asked. Baba was silent for a long time before answering. "He chose wrong." A shiver ran down Kouamé's spine. Meanwhile, behind the scenes of power, some businessmen and corrupt politicians were watching Kouamé closely. His charisma and spiritual influence were a threat to those who profited from corruption. Businessman Gideon Traoré, head of a powerful organization, was talking on the phone in his dark office. "If this modern king wants to play with ancient forces, let's see if the spirits protect him from what's to come." Little did he know that Kouamé's real enemies weren't just human. Kouamé felt a strange energy in the air. He was restless, as if every shadow in the city hid invisible eyes watching him. Meanwhile, Jamila found something shocking. "Your Majesty, there's something you need to see," she said, handing over an ancient manuscript. Kouamé's eyes ran over the worn text. "When the moon devours the sun, the heir of the spiritual kings will be tested. He will have 3 paths. Keycap 1. If you accept the call of the ancestors, you will open a portal to the salvation of your lineage. Keycap 2. If you refuse, your people will be cursed for generations. Keycap 3. If you are betrayed before you choose, the dead will walk among the living to claim what is theirs." A shiver ran through his body. "Does this mean that, if someone tries to stop me before the eclipse, something much worse could happen? Jamila confirmed with a serious look. Small Blue Diamond, the night attack. That same night, Kouamé was ambushed. Masked men intercepted his car as he was returning from Bassam's temple. He tried to fight back, but the blow of a stick knocked him out. Hours later, he woke up tied to a chair in an abandoned warehouse by the sea. In front of him, Gideon Traoré, the man who wanted to destroy him, was walking in circles. "Do you think you're a king?" he mocked. "But this isn't a kingdom. It's a power game, and you're on the wrong team." Kouamé remained silent, taking a deep breath. His mind began to connect the pieces of the puzzle. The test had already begun. He closed his eyes, feeling the flow of spiritual energies around him. The eclipse was near, and he knew he had to act fast. But then something supernatural happened. The lights in the shed flickered violently. The icy wind blew in through the broken window. And then a deafening crash echoed. Gideon's henchmen screamed. Shadows began to move on their own on the walls. A deep, guttural voice filled the room. "The test has begun." Kouamé felt the weight of hundreds of spirits entering that world. Something had been awakened. The abandoned warehouse shook as if it was about to collapse. The shadows on the walls twisted into distorted shapes, whispering in an ancient language. Gideon Traoré's henchmen screamed, dropping their weapons and trying to flee. "What is that?" Gideon shouted, backing away while looking at Kouamé. The king didn't seem frightened. On the contrary, he stood up slowly, still with the ropes on his wrists, but now there was a presence around him, something bigger than himself. The voices echoed inside his mind. "Small Blue Diamond, the choice is yours, King of Spirits. Sacrifice will be required." Kouamé felt a shiver run down his spine. He knew what was happening. The test had begun. In front of him, two spiritual figures emerged from the veil between the worlds. One was a woman dressed in gold and blue, with eyes shining like stars. Her voice was calm and firm. "If you accept the call of the ancestors, you will become the guardian of your people, but you will pay a personal price." The other was a giant shadow, faceless but with eyes as red as coals. His voice was deep, like distant thunder. "If you refuse, you will keep your life as it is, but you will see everything you have built crumble before your eyes." Kouamé took a deep breath. His heart was pounding. He understood now. If he chose his people, he would have to give up something valuable. If he chose himself, it would be the end of his spiritual lineage and the protection of his ancestors. What was he to do? Before he could answer, a gunshot echoed in the warehouse. Kouamé felt a sharp pain go through his shoulder. He staggered backwards, clutching the wound. Gideon was holding a gun, with a sneering smile. "If the spirits can't kill you, I'll take care of it myself." But at that moment, something inside Kouamé awoke. His eyes glowed like fire. He raised his hand and the chains broke on their own. The air became heavy. The ground shook. "You don't understand what you've done, Traoré." His voice was no longer his alone. The ancestors were speaking through him. A violent wind swept through the place, blowing out the lights. And in the dark, Gideon heard whispers coming from all sides. He tried to run. But it was too late. The warehouse had fallen into darkness. The ground shook as if the earth itself was rejecting Gideon Traoré's presence. "No! What's happening?" he shouted, trying to run, but the shadows pulled him back. Kouamé felt the power of the ancestors coursing through his veins. His body was no longer his own. It had been chosen. You wanted to play with forces beyond your comprehension, Gideon. His voice sounded deeper, mingling with the voices of the spirits. Now you will face the judgment of those who came before us. Traoré fell to his knees, begging for mercy. But the spirits showed no mercy. A sharp gust of wind swept through the shed, and when the dust cleared, Gideon was gone. The few remaining henchmen fled in despair. Kouamé remained silent, watching the emptiness where his enemy had been. The shadows began to fade. The eclipse had passed, and with it, fate had been sealed. The golden figure, the same one from his vision, appeared before him once again. You have made your choice, King. The cycle is complete. Kouamé didn't ask what it meant. He already knew. From that day on, he wouldn't just be a leader. He would be the bridge between the living and the dead. His name would be remembered not just in the history books, but in the songs of the spirits. Côte d'Ivoire had its spiritual king back. And this time, no one would dare challenge him.